Baruch Hashem, today's daf yomi is Zecachim daf Yutes, Zecachim 19. His daf is dedicated for Shemir for the Chayalim, myself is Shvuyim, Yishuv for Am Yisrael. We're going to start on the top of 19a, 6 lines from the bottom, where the Gemara says the following. Tanan Hatzam, we learned over there, and this is a Mishnah in Eruvin, that Kohen Shalaka Betzbo, if there was a Kohen who has a wound on his finger. And so the concern here is about laws of Shabbos, that he's not allowed to treat a wound on Shabbos. And then we say, Korach Gami B'mikdash, that if he's in the temple, he's allowed to wrap a bandage around it, of a little bit Medina, but not if he's outside the temple. Rashi says what we're talking about here is B'shat Avod, he's allowed to do it. Why? Because we don't want anybody to see his wound. And even though that a gemi is a healing of a wound, and anything that is medicinal is prohibited on Shabbos because of a decree that maybe you're going to grind up the medicine, nevertheless, that's only outside of the temple. But in the temple, they did not make a decree because of a shvus, of a rabbinic prohibition. They didn't make such decrees. One of the theories behind it is because in the temple the Kohanim were so careful not to sin, so we didn't have to make rabbinic decrees. So in the temple you can wrap your finger in this bandage, but outside of the temple, of a low Medina, but not outside the temple. Baruch Hashem, Boker Tov. Good morning. Everybody's here bright and early today. The Gemaras are in that. The Gemaras are right there. So we're on 19a. So of a low, so we're in 19a, where the Gemara starts by citing a Mishnah that outside the temple, if a Kohen has a wound outside the temple, he can't treat it on Shabbos, like by wrapping a reed around it, but inside the temple he could. And the reason is because inside the temple, we don't make rabbinic decrees, and anything medicinal is a rabbinic decree that's prohibited on Shabbos because of the concern that you might come to grind spices. So, but if you want to remove blood with your treating, then then even in the temple will be prohibited, because that's a chaburahu. That's making a wound, and that's a biblical prohibition, Rashi says. So, Amar Rav Yehuda Breder Bechia, when do we say that this is prohibited? If it's a reed, or when do we say it's permitted in the temple? If it's a reed, katan, but if it would be this is like a Germanic word called a bindle. It's still a word today that they use, but if it would be like a belt, then that would be prohibited in the temple, because it's have a yiter begadim. It's an extra garment. We know that Kohen's only allowed to wear 4 garments. If he's a regular Kohen, 8 garments of a Kohen Gadol. So if it's an extra garment, it's going to be prohibited. So therefore, that's the teaching of Rebbe Chia, that even in the temple, if it was a belt around your wound, it'd be prohibited because it's too many garments. So Rabbi Yochanan Amar, whereas Rabbi Yochanan said, "Well, Amru Yiter Begadim." When do we see that there's a prohibition for having the extra garments? El b'makom begadim. Only in the case where you typically wear your garments. Aval shelo b'makom begadim. But in the case where you don't typically wear your garments, like your finger, we'll have a yiter. That's not going to be considered an extra garment. Gemara says, "Wait 1 second." Typically, mishum chatzitza. Well, anyway, even if it's not prohibited because of an extra garment, it's going to be an interposition between his hand and the service. And meaning to say the Kohen has to do the service with his hands, and that's prohibited because we need to say that the Kohen receives the blood himself, and there can't be an interposition. So Gemara says, no, bismol, it's in his left hand, and the left hand is not kosher to do the service, so therefore it's not going to be an interposition. It's a wound on his left hand. Or else it's not where he does the hand, where he does the service, like for example on the back of the hand, which he doesn't actually touch any of this service. And this is a dispute with Rava. Rava argues with Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says Yiter begadim is too many garments, only in a place where they typically have garments. But if it's not a place where typically have garments, it's not a problem of each of begadim. Rava says the Amar Rava Amar Chisda b'makom begadim. If it would be the place of a garment, afilu nima achas chotzetes. If it's a place of a garment, even one thread will serve as an interposition. Shalom b'makom begadim. But if it's not a place where the garments are, for example, on the back of the hand, it can still be an interposition because we're going to say it's just a larger amount that's needed. Shalosh al shalosh chotzatos, pachos mikan eno chotzatos. Meaning to say, if it's 3 by 3, it's going to be considered a problem. And Rashi says the problem is that's considered already the size of an extra garment, 3 by 3 tvachim. And so therefore, Rashi says the expression of chatzitza here is inexact. That really means it's an extra garment. And whereas Rabbi Yochanan said on the back of the hand is no problem, Rava says, name of Chisda, no, on the back of the hand is another problem because of the size that it will be considered an extra garment. And the Gemara says, on Rabbi Yochanan v'adai pligi. On Rabbi Yochanan, it's for sure an argument because Rabbi Yochanan said if it's not in the place of the garment, it's not an extra garment. And even 3 by 3 wouldn't be a problem. But what about Ad Rabbi Huda Breder of Kliya Milema de Pligi? Would we say is Rava arguing with Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Chia? Because what did he say? He said this bendel is a chatzitza, and Rava says no, the bendel is too small. If it's less than 3, it's not a chatzitza. So is he arguing with Rabbi Yehuda Breder of Chia? So he says no. Shani tziltzol cotton. No. The bendel, even though it's smaller, it's like a small belt. It's smaller than 3 by 3. Nevertheless, it's considered the chashif. It's considered to be distinguished on itself, and so therefore it would be considered an extra garment, even according to Rav and the name of Rav Chisda. Lishnach, alternative version of what Rabbi Yochanan said. This is an alternative version of the opinions. Amar Rav Yehuda Breder Shanu El Gemi, that he says that when do we say that the Kohen, that wouldn't our Mishnah say that you could tie a reed on you in the temple but not outside the temple? That's only by a reed. And if it would be a small bendel, that would be a problem. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan, according to this version, Rabbi Yochanan says, no, when is it a problem? Only if it's less than 3 by 3, the place of the garments. And if it's not the place of the garments, 3 by 3 does in fact serve as a chatzitza. Pachos mikan, but less than that, eino chotzetzes. If it's the place of the garments, it's a problem if it's 3 by 3, but if it's not the place of the garments, it doesn't cause a problem. V'hainu de Rava Amar Rav Chisda. And this is exactly what Rav Chisda said. So, meaning to say, even in the place of the garments, it's only a problem if it's 3 by 3, and that's what Rav Chisda said. So the verse says, Lema pligi ad Rabbi Yehuda Breder Rav Chia. So isn't that arguing to Rabbi Yehuda Breder Rav Chia, who said that if it's tziltzol katan, it causes a chatzitza, and here Rabbi Yochanan is saying it has to be 3 by 3. Where it says no, shani tziltzol katan nechashet. No, the case of the tziltzol katan is different because it's important. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan my area gemi lashmin and tziltzol katan. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that even a tziltzol katan, it does not cause an interposition because it's too small. It's not 3 by 3. If that's the case, why does our Mishnah say a gemi, a reed? It should tell us even a tziltzol katan is not considered a problem, and for sure not a reed. So the Gemara says, no, it's teaching us milsa agavorcha kamashon. It's teaching us something that's called agavorcha, a roundabout manner, meaning saying not something that is directly relevant, but it's to teach us 2 laws at the same time, or 2 concepts. Kamashmo and the gemi masi. He's teaching us also that a reed is not a chatzitza, and it's also teaching us this idea that if you put a reed on your finger, it could be a problem for Shabbos because it's a medicinal activity. So by Rava, so now we're going to have more questions about this problem. By Rava, about the extra garments, what's considered a chatzitza. By Rava asked the following question: Let's say while he's serving, some wind blew up his garment, and so therefore he's not exactly pressed against his body. Do we say al bisaroba? Do we need the garment pressed against his flesh? Because it says we read this yesterday in our Torah. the linen garments need to be pressed against his flesh. And here we have wind in between. Or maybe that's the typical way you wear it. What about if there's a louse between his garments or on his garments or between his garments and the body? For sure, if it's dead, we're not asking a question about that. Because for sure you don't want it there, so it's an interposition. What about a living one? Since in those days they always had a lot of lice, so since it always comes and goes, it's like his flesh. And therefore it's not an interposition. Or maybe because he doesn't want it there. So obviously a louse is less than 3 by 3, but this will be according to position. If it's the place of the garment, then even less than 3 by 3 is a problem. So then the Gemara says, next question, Afar Mausha Yichotz. What about dirt or Afar Vadechayetz? Do we say that this earth is going to be a chatzitza, or do we say avak afar, or do we say? So the Gemara says no, afar vadachayitz. It's for sure chatzitza. Avak afar mao. But what about the very fine dirt? Very fine dirt. Is that a problem? So beis hashechim mao sheyichutz al basaro. What about? Let's say the basically the sleeves were very were too big, and so therefore they're not really attached tight to the underarms. Is it going to be kosher or not? Do we say al basar ba'inam that you need to be right against his flesh? Or that's the way it's worn. Let's say he's cold. He sticks his hand into his body to warm himself up. Can his own body be a chatzitza? Or perhaps not. Name a ma'ushetachot. What about a thread or a hair? Can that be a chatzitza? Do we say nema vadechaytzi? We say, what are you talking about? Of course, we already have established this, that a thread or a hair could be a chatzitza. Now, a nema mododelas mao. What about, we're talking about a hanging thread, meaning to say from the garment itself that it's hanging, so you don't want it there. Is that a chatzitza? By Mar Baravashi, Yatsa Sa'aro Bebigdo. Let's say the Kohen had long hair. He's not supposed to have long hair, but let's say he had long hair inappropriately. So what will be the law there? It will be a chatzitza. Ma'u Sa'aro Kagufo. Dummy would say, no, it's his own hair. It's like his body. Olav Kagufo dummy. Or it's not like his body. Gemara has not answered any of these questions. Vai Rabbi Zera, tefillin Ma'u Sheyachotu. Is the tefillin considered to be a chatzitza? Do we say, can the Kohanim put their tefillin on when they're serving in the temple? And the question is, do we say the tefillin is like the garment? And so therefore it's considered to be an extra garment? Or maybe because the mitzvah of tefillin, Rashi says, look what Rashi says here. Rashi says, or do we say that since the mitzvah of tefillin is going to be that the mitzvah of tefillin is, we have to look at Rashi, Dibra Maskil Mahu. Hold on. Is it going to be considered an extra garment? So maybe because the tefillin is so chavivin olav, because it's so precious to him, it's considered part of his body. Rashi says, or do we say, Kimin ba'avodas la'elachayis, in the olav mitzvah, t'nehave kigufei, mishum chavivusei de mitzvahs. Maybe it's like, since it's like his body, and therefore we're going to say it's because he loves the mitzvah so much, and so therefore it's not an extra garment, and so therefore it's not going to be considered a problem. According to one who says that you can't put on the tefillin at night because the time for tefillin is only during the day. Since at night, it's not a question according to that approach, because since the service is done at night will for sure be considered to be an extra garment, because at that time you can't put them down, so they're not nullified to his body. So during the day, it's going to be considered like an extra garment. According to the one who says that Laila is the time of tefillin, my, do we say mitzvah to gufa chayetz or lo chayetz? Do we say that this is a problem? Meaning to say, if you say it at night, then if we're going to say that Laila is not the time of tefillin, then for sure it's a chatzitza, because it's not going to be nullified to his body. So Igalgal Milsa Umato coming to Rabbi Ami. The question came before Rabbi Ami. Amalei Talmud Arachu Biyadenu Tefillin Chotzitzos. He says, no, we have a very strong tradition that tefillin is a chatzitza and it's considered like a garment and disqualifies the service. So Gemara says, what are you talking about? Meisvei, we learned in the Brisa, Kohanim Bavodas, Levim B'Duchana, and Yisrael B'Mamada. And if the Kohanim are serving in the temple, the Levim are on the platform singing, and the Yisraelim are serving in the temple, Paturim Minat Tefillin. The Yisraelim would serve as the Ma'amad, and they would have different responsibilities. So they would stand there and recite certain prayers. So those are all exempt from the Tefillin because they're so busy, so they can't have proper intent. Minat Tefillin. So they're Paturim Minat Tefillin. They're Paturim from regular prayer and also from Tefillin. So because they're involved in a different mitzvah, Ma'alav, are we going to say, hold on one second. What's the position of the Mamad? And that when the Korban Tamil was brought, they would be there. Their job was to represent Bnei Yisrael, to stand there and watch the Korban. So they're exempt from Tefillin. So Ma'alav doesn't mean they're exempt. It doesn't mean if they put them on, they wouldn't cause a problem. No, the Gemara says, if that would be the case, that the Gemara says, no. Well, no, if they put them on, they would serve as a chatzitza. They're not. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, why would say they're exempt? You shouldn't say they're exempt. You should say they're prohibited to put them on if you say it's a machitza. And furthermore, Gemara answers that question by saying, keeping the equal of VM v'Yisraelim, no, because since there are Levim and Yisraelim who are not prohibited, so therefore use the language of Peturim. But for the Kohanim will be prohibited. The Gemara says, we have a brayso that says, the explicit brayso says if a Kohen decides to wear the tefillin, it's not an interposition. The Gemara says, Lokasha, ha-diyad, ha-derosh. No, it depends on which tefillin. One is the hand. The hand will serve as an interposition because that's between the garment and the flesh. But the head is not interposition, as we're going to see why. Why is the problem? Why is the hand the problem? Because it says you have to put the garment on your flesh. There can be nothing in between, and your hand tefillin is there. The Rosh Nami Ksiv is sometimes it's nefes al rosho. We said this yesterday also, that you have to place the mitznefes on the head of the Kohen. So if that's the case, how are you able? Why is it not a chatzitza? The Gemara explains. Tana, we learned sa'aro haya. We learned in the Brisa. So even though Tana is usually not necessarily Brisa, it says we learned in the Brisa. What? Both of them. They both have to wear a hat when they serve. So sa'aro haya nira bein from mitzetis. The hair was visible between the tzitz, between the forehead. Between the tzitz, which is the forehead plate that's a Kodesh Hashem, and the turban, that there was some hair there, and in that place, Hashem manichin tefillin, there they would put the tefillin. So the Gemara says, Mechuser Kippur. So therefore, that answers that question. The answer to the question is that the Kohen could wear the tefillin of the Rosh, and it would not be a chatzitza, but he wouldn't be able to wear the tefillin of the head. So
why would one do that?
Why would one do what? And he wants to do the mitzvah of wearing the tefillin. So he's fulfilling that mitzvah. I mean, this according to opinion, it says there are two separate mitzvahs, but even according to one, it says one mitzvah, you would do it. So, Mechusar Kippurim, how do we know if you can't put on the hand tefillin, you should still put on the head tefillin? So the Gemara says, Mechusar Kippurim, and how do we know that if you didn't bring your korban, you disqualify the service? The Kohen will bring as an atonement and it'll be purified. So from the pasuk that says, from the fact that he says that until he brought his korban, his mechutz kippurim, then he'll be disqualified to bring it. Hold on one second. As the Gemara continuing our discussion. Oh, this is no good. Going gadol, shalot taval v'shal kidesh bein bebeged, bebeged bein avodah avodah. Yesterday we read about on Yom Kippur about the Kohen Gadol has to wash his hands and legs 10 times, called kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, and before he goes to the mikvah and after he goes to the mikvah. So the Brisa says the Kohen Gadol who did not immerse in the mikvah or did not wash his hands on Yom Kippur, between the changing of the garments, or between the different services, and he served avodah, so kshira, his service is still okay. They don't disqualify the service. But if he didn't do it first thing in the morning, before he started to serve, he disqualified. So why is the tefillah and the kiddush yadayim raglayim on Yom Kippur not essential? Why doesn't it disqualify the service? Because since we know it's biblical law, because it says it should be essential. No, the reason why it's not, it says only the wearing of the proper clothing is required, or is disqualifying, but not the washing the hands or the face, the washing the hands and the feet, and the immersing in the mikvah. So Tzavu Panav, when Rabbi Yochanan answered this question to Rav Asi's face lit up. Tzavu Panav. Amarei, Rabbi Yochanan said, Vava ufta katzvilach. No, I wrote to you a vav like on a log. Meaning to say, you can't read a vav on a log because it's filled with a lot of cracks. I gave you a bad answer. If it's the case that washing the hands and legs is not essential, then it shouldn't even be essential in the morning. But it is essential the first time. So I gave you a bad answer. Don't get too excited. Amar Chitzkiya, Amar Kra, what's the source? So it says there'll be a law for you and for all your descendants forever. Something that's required for other Kohanim is also essential for the Kohen Gadol, and that means the first one. Something that's not required for the other Kohanim, i.e., the other times before he does the service, the washing the hands and the legs, then it's not going to be disqualifying. Rabbi Yonasan Amar Mehach, he says a different source. It says that Moshe and Aaron and his sons washed their feet, their hands and their feet. So something that is required for his children is going to be required for Aaron, and something that's not required for his children is not going to be required for him. Because we learn out from the pasuk Moshe and Aaron Banav. Rabbi Yonasan my time Omer de Chizkiah. So why is Rabbi Yonasan not say Chizkiah's answer? He says that pasuk the Chizkiah Darshan Amracha Hu Dor Samuduksiv. That's teaching us that also Aaron's children, future generations, have to wash their hands and legs the first time. Idach my time Omer mehai. So why doesn't Chizkiah cite the pasuk for Rabbi Yonasan? Like Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. He needed it for Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. Kol kiyur she'im bo kedei lekadesh ava kohanim. Any basin that doesn't have enough to wash 4 kohanim's hands and legs at the same time, that you can't use. Shenema rachatzumi mena Moshe the Aaron Bana. Moshe Aaron has 2 children. Tanar Banan Keitza mitzvah kiddush. What is the mitzvah of washing your hands and legs? So the mitzvah is maniach yado ayamanis. I'll give you a ragla hayimanis. You stick your right hand on top of your right foot, The other asmoas al gabe asmoas, and your left hand on top of your left foot, umekadesh, and then you wash your hands. Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda Amar Maniach Shtei Yadav Zu Al Gabe Zu, and Al Gabe Shtei Raglav Zu Al Gabe Zu Mekadesh. You put your two hands on top of each other, and then you put the two hands on your two legs, and then you pour water from the basin on everything together. So obviously, you can't do it. Somebody else is pouring your water for you. You can't do it, but still, this seems a little tricky. Tricky. Amrulo iflakta. Well, that's the first approach. Oh, you mean your hands and then your legs, your hands and then. I don't know why they assume that, but I don't know. I don't know. We'll see what this thing. We'll come back to it. Amrulo iflakta. He said, "Yev sharla sokain. You can't stand like that." So he says, and indeed, Shapir Karmoi, he has a good response. Amar Yosef v'chaver Masai. I know his friend's helping him stand up. My binay. What's the difference between why the Chum argues with Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda? Amar Baya Amida min atzad ika b'nao. Question is whether or not standing from the side is called standing, because you're supposed to be standing when you do it. So if somebody's helping you stand, it's not called standing. Amar Rav read the Rashi Ravina. Why doesn't he sit down when he does the kiddush? Amakra l'shares. No, it says l'shares. It's a service. The shares they require standing. Tana Rabbanan kiddush yadav raglav b'yom. Let's see, wash your hands and legs during the day. Ain't tzarach hakadosh b'layla. You don't need to. If you're continuing to work, you don't need to do it again at night, like the burning of the limbs, even after sunset. But if you did it at night, tzarach hakadosh b'yom, you're going to need to do it in the morning. Divrei Rabbi, Shaya Rabbi Omer Lina Moelis Bekidush Yadayim Raglayim. Lina, it will disqualify overnight. Will disqualify the washing of the hands. Rabbi Lezer Shimon Omer Ein Lina Moelis Bekidush Yadayim Raglayim. No, the washing the hands does not disqualify. Tanya Idach. Another brisa said Haya Omedu Makriv Agavim Mizbeach Kol Laila. Let's say you're standing on and bringing the limbs on the altar all night. Ora, once it reaches morning, Ton Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. He needs to wash his hands again and his feet. Rabbi Elazar Bar Rabbi Shimon Amar Kivan Shekiddush Yadayim Raglayim Itchilas Avoda. Since he started at the beginning of his service, I feel Mikan Vadasar Yamim Meino Tzarach Kadosh. He doesn't need to wash his hands again, even up until 10 days. Utzricha, and we need both of the brises. Yes, Mina Kamaisa. If we just said the first one, I would say Bahi Kama Rabbi. That's what Rabbi says in position. The pasuk claim Avoda because he's starting a new service. Al Baha. But we're the whole pasuk where he didn't interrupt. Maybe you agree with Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon that he doesn't need to wash his hands again. That since he's serving and he doesn't need to wash his hands again. And if we have the second approach, we'd say Baha Kama Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon. Oh Baha Rabbi. Then he would agree to Rabbi that it disqualifies. So we need both. So the Gemara says, "My time of the Rebbe." What's the reasoning of Rebbe? It says when you come to the altar. Meaning to say when you come to the altar, you're obligated. So my time of the Rebbe was Rav Shimon. Says bivoam. We're about to stop. We're about to 1 second. We're about to stop we go upstairs. So actually, there's a good place to stop. We'll pick this up, God willing. Tomorrow we say Rabbi Yosef. I only want to say one other thing that some say that the source for us having to some of the commentaries explain the source for us having to do the Tilat Yadayim right when we wake up in the morning is based upon the Kohanim, Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So we're going into service of Hashem. So we'll stop the recording here. I did a little rush, but we'll do it again after davening.